preparing to retire and leave us. But I'm sad about that. Oh, was I not supposed to announce that? We love you, Kathy. Oh, well, you were ready?
Yeah, we're on already.
Okay, great. All right, so we're glad to have you here. Just to make sure that everybody knows in the room, if you're here, this is being filmed, it's being live streamed, and then we are going to be putting it on our website to be viewed at a later date by the hundreds and thousands of people that want to see it. So just to let you know that you have given your consent. All right, great. So we'll go ahead and begin. So this panel is the crazy but not rich Asian American KidLit authors dreaming of diversity. So I hope to talk about being an Asian American author, Asian American books, etc. So my name is Virginia Loh-Hagan, and I am Asian American. So my ethnic background is Chinese, and I tend to write a lot of stories about Chinese American. For example, my newest book that's coming out in December is about the Chinese New Year dragon, Neon. And I have a book out right now for the past 2 years, Proposed Lucky Chinese New Year, about Chinese New Year traditions. And my first mid-grade is called The Jade Dragon, and that was about a Chinese American girl growing up in Northern Virginia. And my dissertation was on the cultural authenticity of Asian American children's lit. So I kind of like this stuff. So I'm going to also introduce the panelists that we have here, the wonderful panelists, and then also have them tell you a little bit about themselves. So we have Benson, Shum, we have MariNaomi, May Respicio, Maple Lamb, and Henry Lien. And we're going to go ahead and start because Henry said he didn't want to sit at the end because he didn't want to start first, so I'm going to call him out. So Henry, we'll have Henry start. So right now we'll just do introductions. So tell us about you and your books.
My name is Henry Lien. I am the author of a middle grade series called Pea Sprout Chen from Holt Macmillan. It is a middle grade fantasy about a girl who comes to study a fictitious sport that combines figure skating with kung fu. And as I said during the meet and greet, the New York Times described it best as Hermione Granger meets Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, meets The Ice Capades, meets Mean Girls. But it's also very much about immigration and girl power. And I am originally from Taiwan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Maple Lamb. I am originally from Hong Kong. I came here when I was 11. I am an author and illustrator, mainly for picture books, sometimes middle grades. The latest middle grade that I did was written by Kathleen Crowell called Frenemies in the Family. It's about famous siblings in history, which was really exciting because I love history.
Great. You can keep that on your
Oh.
Got this one. Hi, my name is May Respicio, and my debut middle grade novel is called The House That Lou Built. It's all about a 12-year-old Filipino-American girl named Lou who has a big dream, and her dream is to build a tiny house. And during her journey, she learns how to lean on her community. She discovers more about herself and the world around her, and also just a deeper meaning of home. And it also just received just a shout out to Asian American librarians, the Asian Pacific American Library Association honor title for this year.
So May, before we go to MariNaomi, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself too.
Oh, sure. So I was born here in California to a Filipino family who immigrated here in the 1970s, and so that's the main lens that I write through is as a Filipino American.
I'm MariNaomi. I have been making comics since the 90s, and mostly about my life, so memoir comics, graphic memoirs. I think I have 4 of those. I have a graphic novel trilogy for young adults that the first one came out last year, the second one just came out, next year's a third, and pretty much all my protagonists are probably going to be mixed race like me because that's what I want to see. And I also run the Cartoonists of Color database and the Queer Cartoonist database. And in the spring, I hope, I'm going to launch the Disabled Cartoonist database, which is just what it sounds like, resources where you can find people, marginalized people, and hire them and buy their books and that sort of thing. My background is I'm half Japanese and half all the other white things. And my parents currently live in Japan, but they're both American citizens, even though my mom started out living in Japan. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Benson?
Hi, my name is Benson Shum. I'm an animator, author, and illustrator. I have my book, Holly's Day at the Pool here, published with Hyperion, and my other book, Go To Sheep, written by Jennifer Sattler, and I illustrated with Little Simons of Simon & Schuster. I was born and raised in Vancouver, Canada, and I've been in the United States for about 7 years. And yeah, so Holly's Day at the Pool is about a little hippo who has the fear of the water, and with the help of her dad and her sister, how she kind of overcomes that fear. So it's really a story about bravery. And if you're scared of something, you should just dive right in.
Great, thank you. So just to add, I forgot to share. So again, like I said, my name is Virginia, and it actually, the running joke I always like to say is that my name is Virginia. I am from Virginia, and I went to the University of Virginia. And the reason why my name is Virginia is because my parents were immigrants from China, and they named me after the state in which I was born. So yes, I was born in Virginia. If I was born in Idaho, I would be Idaho. If I was born in Mississippi, I would be Mississippi. So my parents did not know that those are names you don't call little children. But anyway, so that's I think we all, I just wanted to make sure that we all identified so that you can ask us about our background. Okay, so my first question for this wonderful panel is, what does it mean to be an Asian American author? And I know that these are loaded questions, and I'm hoping that we can deconstruct that a little bit. So since I put Henry on the spot last time, I'm going to put him on the spot again because he thought I was going to go the other way. Henry.
Fine, I'll bring it.
So you don't say those things to me and then
all
expect me to
okay,
play
all
right.
I'm not blaming you. I really like the idea of expanding what an Asian American work is, or an Asian American author. I think there's room now for, I mean, we think of diversity and we think of Asian American literature as pertaining solely to the skin tone of the characters and the creators of the works. And of course, that's a very important part of that body of literature. But I think it also encompasses works by Asian Americans that do not deal ostensibly with Asian American issues per se. I think it also covers works that not just bring different types of characters as starring characters into the works, but different types of actual stories. And there are some favorite examples that I like to give, but I don't want to hog this question if we're going to do a brief sweep through and then come back to it.
Sure. So does anyone at this table, does anyone want to respond to what does it mean to be an Asian American author? Go ahead. Go ahead.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, for me, being an Asian American author, it feels like a real joy and also a privilege to be able to share the space with all kinds of Asian American lenses. I mean, if you think about the canon of Asian American KidLit, I don't think there is one, or you know, there is one, but it's not this robust thing where you can find all kinds of different stories within different Asian American cultures. So I'd say anyone who is Asian American and writing for kids is contributing to that in some way. And to me, that's just a really cool thing to be doing at this point in publishing and putting these kinds of books out into the world for kids.
Great. Maple, did you want to respond to that? What was the question? What does it mean to be an Asian American author?
You know, when I write, at the beginning at least, I don't think I was thinking specifically, what should I write as an Asian American author? I was thinking about writing in interesting books. But I think things happen more organically. Like, for example, when I wrote My Little Sister and Me and illustrated it, the characters are Asian. I didn't have that in mind when I first created it. It just organically flow out. I guess part of it is that everything you create is a slight reflection of who you are and what you experience. And I think that in and of itself is probably pretty important because it's a deeper reflection and it shows through your work.
Great. Benson, are you ready? Go for it.
I'm ready. I've thought about the question. I honestly don't. So I know what it is to be an Asian American reader. And I guess as an Asian American author, I mean, I also know what it's like to be a queer female reader and all the other identities that I have. And so as that an author who is all those things, I just try to put out in the world things that I want to see because I'm very selfish. So I want more representation. I want more stories about girl friendships that aren't like fighting about boys. I want, you know, more of a reflection of what I think is interesting, not all the stuff that I've been fed throughout my whole life. And it's funny because I as a kid did not read young adult. So I think I read my first young adult in my 30s. And so now as a woman in my 40s, it's interesting like going back and I'm like, okay, I'm going to write the things that I wished I could have seen, because back then I just didn't feel like there was any, I mean, maybe there was good stuff, but it's not what I was finding.
It wasn't mainstream.
I mean, when you grow up and the only person who looks like you is Long Duck Dong, you know, it kind of sucks. So,
Benson.
First, I'm just very honored to be with this panel here, and I think for me, it's like Maple said, I never thought about it when I'm writing, but I do tend to notice that when I do illustrate my work, I do put a lot of what is familiar to me, how I draw things would come from my background and how I grew up. Both my parents are from China and grew up in Hong Kong. So a lot of the how I grew up was very Chinese, where I even had an issue speaking English going to elementary school. I needed help because I was speaking so much Chinese. And I think that kind of influences how I illustrate and also how I animate or even write as well. Even like I think one of the first things for me was when I picked up Crazy Rich Asians and I was reading the book, and to have the characters describe beauty with long black hair was, I've never read that before, and something in me just felt great to even read those words. So I just feel very honored to be in this panel, to be speaking about this. So thank you.
Great. So what are some challenges of being an Asian American author, if any, right? Haha, yes, there are challenges. We'll start with Henry.
Good with pattern recognition. I see a pattern emerging. I think my experience has been unusual because I have selected my gatekeepers quite carefully, and my editor is not Asian, Tina Dubois at ICM, but she is the absolute best ally any diverse author could possibly hope for. And she placed my book with a Taiwanese-American editor, Tiffany Liao, the brilliant Tiffany Liao at Holt. And they were very supportive of me leaning very hard into the complexities of the cultures that I was drawing from in my books. And an interesting thing happened. Basically, I mean, my books are commercial, but they also deal with a lot of things that are quite weighty. They deal with foot binding. They deal with geopolitical intrigue. They deal with the history of colonization when you've got a little island that's been fought over by two superpowers, and what it means to live with the people that conquered you, and all these very, very weighty things. But here's what happened. My editor basically, she came up with a calculus. She said, you can have the most ambitious things you want, but the price is you have to make it that much more entertaining. You've got to make it that much more of a page turner if you want to make it that much more of an ambitious book. So you can keep in all of those things you want. You can make it your diverse, queer, geopolitical, socially conscious, vegan, animal rights book that you want to, but you've got to make it that much more entertaining and impossible to put down. So I said, okay, I accept that challenge because it's forcing me to be a better writer. So I think I had an unusual experience because I had so much support from the gatekeepers that you think would be the ones that cross their arms and say no. I had a lot of support, but they also said, okay, this is your responsibility then. We are doing something brave. You've got to work much harder as an author to help us bring it to an audience.
Great, thank you. So anybody on this side?
So as I mentioned, I think before, I've been doing comics since the 90s. I think 97 was when I started publishing comics, and it's definitely been a challenge for the longest time. Until very recently, publishers would literally whitewash me and say, you know, like I had to kind of ease back on the ethnic content, but I feel like that's changing a lot in just the last several years, so maybe that's not going to be a challenge anymore.
Benson,
Thank you, Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah. Here, here.
Benson, do you want to respond? So what are the challenges of being an Asian American creator? Okay. May?
Well, I think, and hopefully this won't be a challenge for much longer because I do think that the industry is changing, but you know, when you look at contemporary bookshelves, at least for middle grade fiction, there's a handful of Filipino authors writing stories about kids who happen to be Filipino, but that's just a small number of lenses into countless lenses of the Filipino-American culture. And so, you know, there's some pressure there in thinking like, oh, this represents every Filipino. Well, that's not true. There are so many stories within my culture that have yet to be told. And so there's some challenge in that, in trying to write a story and trying to, you know, help audiences see that, oh, this isn't the only kind of Filipino family that there is. So I think things will change as we publish more books about Asian American families and kids, but right now that definitely feels like a challenge as a writer.
Sure.
I just want to respond to that and steal your answer because that was a much better answer. But I definitely have had people say it's nice to finally get representation, and that is such a huge weight that I am not willing or ready to take, and which is why I'm trying to promote, you know, people who, you know, other Asian American, just all sorts of marginalized groups, because I feel like there definitely should be more voices. But I think, oh man, you just have to put that out of your mind because it's too much. It's too much pressure.
For me, I would say I think a challenge is when, as an Asian American writer, and I like writing stories about Asian Americans. I like writing stories about you know, Chinese culture and Chinese traditions. Obviously, you know, I've done a lot with the Chinese New Year, but I also feel like you're always kind of worried too about being pigeonholed, that this is all that you can write. And, you know, so, and right now it's what I like to write. And those are the stories that are coming to me, and I'm fine with that, but there is that fear of whether or not you're going to be pigeonholed. And I think that, you know, you fight that by showing that you can write, you know, all these different types of stories. But then I'm also, you know, then you push back and you think, but I also don't mind being known as the Asian American writer that writes stories about Chinese American things. But I do think I don't want the publishing houses or my readers to limit me to that. But I want the freedom to be able to do that and more. So I would say that that's a challenge that I think about. Something that, you know, has been brought up on this panel that I want to push on too is this idea of identifying what it means to be Asian American, because I think that that's a huge topic. And for example, because I used to be on the APALA Awards Committee, and you know, that's Asian American Pacific. So like, who's included? Because I think part of the issue with Asian American advocacy in general is because of the interethnic strife and the interethnic politics, like who, you know, who's included under this umbrella. And unlike other cultural groups, the Asian American identity, you know, it lacks a little bit in advocacy because we haven't been able to join forces. But I think as generations have changed, I think that is changing. I see that, right? And also another issue that came up, and then I want to hear responses from the panelists, but this idea of, you know, the Asian American children's lit market. And I'm going to argue and say that there's always been Asian American books out there. I mean, I want to give kudos to In the Year of the Boar and Jackie Robinson, and you know, a lot of, you know, Grace Lien has been around forever. Like there's a lot of Asian American authors that have been putting out great quality material. But I think the problem is we're getting a lot of play now because of Crazy Rich Asians and, you know, a lot of other things that are happening. But I think we're getting into the mainstream a lot more. And so I don't think that the quality or quantity really has changed. It's the response, the public response that has changed, which is good. We'll use that. But anybody have comments that you want to speak to that issue? Go go ahead.
I mean, I did start getting, like, seriously, after that movie came out, suddenly all these editors were very interested in me and asking me to commission things, which I don't actually have time for right now, but I was like, that's very interesting. And I thought, at first, I'm like, oh, wow, I finally made it. I'm not gonna name any names because I plan on actually submitting to them eventually. But then I felt all like hot shit. Sorry, children's lit. Hot stuff.
It's okay. We're just being filmed.
And then I talked to, I was telling a close friend of mine who's another Japanese American cartoonist. She's like, oh yeah, they reached out to me too. I'm like, oh, I see what you're doing. And then I talked to a Filipino cartoonist friend. And, oh yeah, they reached out to me too. I'm like, this is very interesting. It's amazing what one successful movie can do. Mm-hmm. Like seriously, like it was like a week after the movie came out.
Just to kind of add on to that, it's interesting also how the great thing about being able to be in this community is that we also in some ways shape what in somewhat Hollywood, because a lot of movies are made from books, stories from books, and I think the more diverse books we have, the more diverse Hollywood will eventually become. Because if it wasn't for Kevin Kwan's book, we wouldn't have this movie, and then without that movie, we wouldn't even have these necessary conversations, right?
So we would have these conversations.
Oh, sorry.
I just wouldn't have the catchy title for the panel, but we would have these conversations.
But like getting certain calls and stuff like that just out of the blue,
Right.
So yeah, I think it's kind of amazing.
I really did think I'd finally made it though.
Maple.
I remembered, I think it was about 10 plus years ago when Grey's Anatomy came out, Battlestar Galactica came out, and I remembered thinking, oh, because there are these strong Asian American or at least Asian characters in these TV series that I haven't really thought to myself until that point that I go, I can really relate to that. And I didn't, when I grew up, because I read and speak another language in addition to English. So I would read Chinese books if I ever want to have characters that I can relate to from my own ethnicity. And I read other American books that are of Caucasian characters, etc. And it's always these two things, that's like two rivers in my head that flow simultaneously, and it works fine. It wasn't until probably more recently that I see more Asian American protagonists in both the movie industry and of the KidLit community in general. And I think it's wonderful because kids can truly reflect, see more of themselves in these stories, and kids who are not of this ethnicity could also experience a bigger world in general. So I'm really excited of what's next.
I'm excited too, and I want to actually bring it back to the title of this particular panel, Crazy Not So Rich Asians, because I've been thinking very much about why Crazy Rich Asians succeeded, and before that Black Panther, and how people are equating them. And I don't think it's a fair comparison, but I do see one commonality, and that is they both uplift a type of power. And with Crazy Rich Asians, it was monetary power, and with Black Panther, it was technological power. And there's a glamour that comes with that makes it very obvious why these were massive runaway crossover hits. And I think the interesting thing will be to see if this opens the door for quieter stories that are not about obvious power, not about rich people, not about people with alien technology. Does this open the door for those quieter stories? I hope it does.
And I also we're talking a lot about Crazy Rich Asians, but I also want to do a shout out to the show Fresh Off the Boat too, because I felt like that kind of started, putting an all Asian American cast on mainstream TV, and then of course that Constance Wu, she's been fabulous. But I think that there has been this growing power.
I cried when I saw that first episode because things they just stole it from my life. I was so good.
And then have you guys seen Kim's Convenience? I'm gonna put that out there. Yes, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. But I think there's a lot of cool stuff coming out. And you know, although I feel like in some ways, and I'm going to speak for myself, but I feel like a lot of you could relate. But I feel like, you know, I'm riding the wave of that, right? But we've been around. We've been around for a long time, but I think now it's you know, that we get to shine a little bit, and I hope that we can keep that light on us. Okay, so my next question is, what do you hope for the future of Asian American KidLit? I'm going to lay off Henry.
I'm ready to go. I'm by now prepared.
We'll start with May.
So what I hope for the future of Asian American KidLit, you know, what I would love to be doing is to keep writing middle grade books and have it not be an Asian American book. It's just a book about a kid going through his or her everyday life, doing his or her everyday things, who happens to be Filipino. You know, and as much as I love being associated with, you know, oh, she's a Filipino-American author, well, yeah, you know, I just want to write books. I don't want to have to, you know, like you said, be pigeonholed into this is a Filipino book. So, you know, all kids need stories just to tell about their lives and to help them process the world around them, and that's what I want to keep doing with characters who happen to be Asian.
Sure. Henry, what is your take on this? What do you hope for the future of Asian American KidLit?
I'm looking at Harry Potter and Star Wars specifically because those are two franchises that I bonded with very hard and will never get over. And I think J.K. Rowling is a fantastic ally. I love her. But I see her attempts to diversify in the interstitial parts of the Harry Potter canon. I see some, it's like she's retrofitting. And I don't blame her because she wrote those books in a very different time, in a different world, and she's doing her best to try to make them more inclusive now. I would love to see a Harry Potter that was diverse, that had diversity baked in from the original recipe, which is what I've tried to do with my own books, to not draw upon another tradition, make our own Harry Potter, make our own Star Wars. And so I would like to see that, these beloved, massive franchises that are not about plopping a particular face into an existing trope or an existing genre, but something that is Asian, baked from the recipe, the original recipe. And the other thing I would really like to see is different types of stories, as I alluded to before. I believe very much that we can draw upon a lot of storytelling traditions that can teach us new ways to make satisfying stories. I'll tell you a favorite anecdote. Anybody seen My Neighbor Totoro? Miyazaki? Okay, a beloved film, if you have not seen a Japanese animated film. And the film critic Roger Ebert saw it. He famously wrote 2 reviews. I think it might be the only film he wrote 2 reviews for. First time he saw it, I think he gave it 2 stars. He said, I don't get it. It's a children's animated film that has no villain. There is the 2 siblings, they get along. The parents love their kids. The kids don't rise up and teach the parents a life lesson. It's not about their individuation, and the mother's not dead. All these things, I don't understand. This is not a story. Basically, this is not a story. And there's no self-esteem arc that the children go upon where they have to discover themselves separate from the parents. This is just not a story. I do not get this. And then he was dragged back to a second viewing of it, and it was with a nephew or a niece, and it was a crowd of kids in Chicago, and Chicago's very diverse, and he just watched the kids and watched their crescendos as they reacted to things that were invisible to him because he was so ingrained in Western storytelling. You have to have 3-act story, and you have to have all these things that he pointed out as missing. And he realized you don't need them to have a satisfying story. Look at this reaction from these kids here. This thing that I thought was boring, they are entranced by. And so he wrote a second review, famously wrote a second review saying, my eyes have been opened. This is a story about the small things that burn themselves into your memory as a child. The sound of rain coming down on an umbrella. The idea that you can grow something. And that is as magic, and no spoilers, but they grow something in the book. And that is as magical as finding this fantastical creature in the forest. It's not magic, but it is magic. And all these little things. This is basically an art house film that somehow kids are responding to it. And I didn't, because apparently I was too ingrained in a particular type of story. So I would love to see stories where we don't follow all of these things, where there is no villain, where it's not about building up a self-esteem arc, where it's all these different things. Because there's a lot of storytelling traditions, specifically Asian storytelling traditions, that are not about those things. So I would love to see more room for that.
Great. Mari and then Benson.
I actually can't top that amazing answer, but I would like to encourage everyone who gave my books a bad Goodreads review to go back and reread it with someone who loves my book and then give it a second review. Benson?
It's kind of to go off of what Henry said, was that there's another movie out called Mirai. I don't know if you heard about it, and it's up for Academy in the animated category. And it's very similar, where we had the director come in, and he was speaking about, the first thing he said to us was, this is not, there's no dragons, there's no action, this is not that type of story. And he apologized, which me and my colleagues were very surprised, like, why are you apologizing for your film? You're showing it to us. But because it wasn't how North American makes films. So he was afraid that the audience is not going to appreciate it. But after we got on the screen, we were so impressed with it, because it was very similar to Miyazaki's films, where this one was like a slice of life, you know, about how does this little kid deal with a newborn sister coming into his life. And it's all about that. And it's all in his imagination. And it was such a very powerful film that you don't need, like, how, really is what just Henry said, that there's so many different ways to tell a story. And I hope that that everyone will just be more open to a different style of writing and look. So,
Great, thank you. Maybe.
That was such a wonderful answer, by the way. I just wanted to say that when I talk KidLit to a lot of my friends, sometimes they're like, "Oh, have you read that book, you know, published in Germany or France or different countries in Asia?"
Wow,
And there's
you have a lot more cosmopolitan friends than.
and we all get super excited over it. And then it's a completely different style. You don't see the similar story arc and structure in American picture books, and which I know when I read some of the books, like even like in Chinese, they would say, well, if you're writing for American market, make sure you write for the American audience, because they are very used to this particular story arc and story structure. And it's sort of, I have that at the back of my mind. So if I pitch stories to an American publisher, I would go for that particular structure, knowing that, well, I need to make sure this fits for my audience's taste. And if this is not for that, I'll pitch it to my Chinese publisher, which will publish the book in Chinese instead. And I hope that maybe going forward, we could probably experiment more with different types of storytelling, maybe in the Asian formats, quieter formats, maybe not in that whole the arc, climax, and resolution with a twist. That's pretty much the formula for it. Maybe this way we could understand more of different various cultures, you know, fill walls and moats, maybe more bridges.
Sure. Well, so what I just learned from April's response is that she's pretty big time. She's got Chinese publishers, she's got German publishers, she's got American publishers. Wow. Okay. So in terms of thinking about the future, I actually think that the future is going to be much more fluid, because I feel like we're going to have a lot more multiracial stories, biracial stories. We need that. Because I also feel like now, and especially when we look at today's students, they are of different identities and of different cultures. So I think that's going to be the challenge, is how do you write an Asian American book, or how do you write, you know, and not that we've all talked about, you don't set out to write an Asian American book, it just happens. But, you know, we're going to have to think about our boundaries and our definitions. Because, you know, because a lot of the, you know, our kiddos today, they are of different cultures, and even within the Asian American identity, they have different cultures. You know, they could be Japanese and Cambodian. So I'm just curious to see what that future is going to look like. I think that we have, we're fighting for this space for reflection and having our kids be reflected. But I think that idea of representation and reflection when our demographics continue to be very fluid and different will be interesting. And as a person that loves folk tales, I love folk tales. That's going to be an interesting thing to write about as well. Like what happens to folk tales or the tradition of folk tales when you do have our readers are from various different cultures. I think there's always room for folk tales. Like I think there's room for urban myths and all these stories as part of our story. But it'll be interesting in terms of contemporary realities too. Mari?
The only time I really think about representation, like I'm not thinking about it when I'm writing or drawing. It's either when I'm experiencing it, which, as I said before, I didn't grow up with a lot of representation. There were 0 half Japanese people anywhere in the media except for Sean Lennon, who's actually younger than me. So I had no idea like what that would look like to be a half Japanese adult or half anything. There was nothing out there. And so now when I finally see, read Ruth Ozeki or something who's half Japanese, I got these chills that I didn't know were there. And so that's when I think about representation, and also when I'm doing public events and I get a lot of young half Japanese or half Asian or half something people come up and just are so like, oh my God, finally, we can see ourselves, and it just I love it, but it also makes me really sad because I'm like, oh, please put. This goes back to the last question, like, what do you want to see? I just want to see just a glut, just so many books coming from all different, various, from everybody. I want to hear everyone's voices,
And I think one thing that I want to give kudos to the work that Asian American storytellers have done is I feel like our stories too have moved from this idea of model minority myth to more diverse contemporary realities. So that has been really interesting to watch as well. Okay, so now we have about 20-some minutes left, and I want to make sure that I give space for the folks in the crowd, the many, many, many people that are here, for those of you online, that would like to ask a question of the panelists. Yes, Steph. Well, before you ask, I just want to point out, too, that Steph Cha herself is an Asian American writer. So just shout out to Steph.
Steph's awesome.
There's a concept that the Pulitzer Prize novelist Lien has talked about of narrative plenitude, this idea that once you have lots of stories, you don't have to worry so much about the onus of representation. I just wanted to note that. But the question I had, though, was, as Virginia mentioned, I am also an author, and I've gotten people, I've got people who come to my work looking for, specifically because I'm Korean American, and I have some people who come because, they just want to read a good mystery. But I've had so many people tell me things like, I'm going to buy this for my one Korean friend. I've had one person say, I'm going to buy this for my Taekwondo teacher. And I'm curious because there's a lot of, you talked about the two rivers, the Asian media and American media, which largely leads out Asian Americans. And, so much of Asian American stuff that we see is also, pulls, of course, draws on rich cultures of these other countries. And so I wonder how you navigate dealing with that difference, and what do you think about, if people are coming to you because they want to get something exotic, even though maybe you write about Los Angeles or you write about, high school romance. Do you think about this, and does it bother you, and does it matter?
When my first book that got a big publisher was about my sex life, and I was very prepared to have a lot of, what's the word for a white guy who's really into Asian women?
Fetish?
Yeah, fetish. People, yellow fever, thank you. A lot of people who had yellow fever be into the book just because I'm half Japanese, even though that's not what the book's about. So I kind of girded my loins before my very first book came out. I'm like, you know what? If they want to give me my money, that's cool. And I kind of have, and since then I've kind of put that out of my mind. Not because it doesn't bother me. I mean, it doesn't bother me because I put it out of my mind, but like I kind of have to, because you don't, like, obviously you don't get to control how people experience your work, and you know, or even how like someone sees your Facebook profile, like, or how anyone like views you. Like everyone's just bringing their own baggage or whatever to the table, and I feel like that's something I'm still kind of working on it, and just as an author in general, I just have to make peace with everyone's gonna read this differently. It's not mine to control anymore. But yeah, when I think about it, it's icky.
So, FYI, so I'm married to a white guy, but he does not have yellow fever. If anything, I have tall nerd fever, if there is such a thing. Is there someone from this table that would like to respond to?
I'm also married to a white guy, FYI.
There we go.
I think what you said about when there is a critical mass of works, then no one author has to bear that onus. And maybe I'm naive, but I kind of think that artists should work as if there were already that critical mass. They should follow their instinct and write the book that they want to write. And if you're, you know, like Sean Tan's a great example. People know Sean Tan? Mm-hmm. Okay, one of my favorite living authors, and he's biracial, Chinese, Australian, and some of his works deal with immigration and alienation and crossing cultures, and some of them don't. But he's working in a surrealist mode, so you kind of can't tell when he is or he isn't. But his vision is clear and specific, and he has always stuck with it. And sometimes it does feed those needs that people probably are looking for when they see that name Tan on the book, and sometimes it doesn't, and he just does not seem to care. And I kind of applaud that method, sticking to your artistic vision. Outside of KidLit, you've got authors, you know, some of the most internationally acclaimed Asian authors of Asian heritage, Haruki Murakami and Katsuo Ishiguro. Murakami has wall-to-wall Asian characters, and they're all listening to the Beatles, and they're all eating hamburgers. And you will learn nothing about Asian culture by reading them. And he doesn't care. Yep. He's doing his thing. That was what he was interested in. And Ishiguro often will have characters that have no Asian novels that have no Asian characters, like Never Let Me Go. Anybody read Never Let Me Go? Mm-hmm. Okay, a masterpiece. No Asian characters, but you come away with it thinking, this is so Japanese in feel. Their idea of sacrifice and what heroism constitutes, so Japanese in feel. And so I feel like these three authors have created works that were not your go-to source for your hit of Asian culture, and they didn't care, and they stuck to their visions, and I think that ultimately is how we should try to work. Mm-hmm. Write the book that you want to write.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
So as librarians, we are often book talking and writing book reviews, and there's a big move now in book reviewing or talking about books. So you explicitly call out the identity markers of the main characters. And in order to combat the white default, right? Like to say that everyone assumes unless you say otherwise that these characters are white. So do you like that? Is that like a positive turn in that they're that your characters will be named specifically in that way in a review, or would you rather, like you're saying, just to be a story about someone who just so happens to be Asian? And, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Is that a positive turn of events? Yeah.
When I first saw that in a Kirkus review of my book, I was a little like, what? Like, why call out that as opposed to like their, you know, I don't know, all the other identity markers? But I don't know. I don't think it's ultimately a bad thing, but it did kind of make me feel weird. I have a friend who's an author of color whose book happened to have all white people because it was placed in a historic time and place where there wasn't a lot of diversity, and they were not too pleased about having all the white characters called out. and I understood that too.
So I would say that my experience is different because my stories have been about Asian American culture and feature Asian American characters. So I'm fine, obviously, with that being called out. But I'll go to Henry or one of you. I saw one of you wanting to respond? No? Did you, Maple? Go, and then I'll finish. Go ahead.
I don't think I particularly mind. It is accurate at the end of the day. Oh, this picture book has Asian American characters featured in it, and which is true. I honestly, it's ethnic identity is one of many identities that I carry. And if people ask you, are you Chinese? Yeah. Are you Chinese American? Yeah. Are you Asian American? Yeah. Also, a daughter, a sister. As we go through life, I think identities, they're not mutually exclusive. They are additive at the end of the day. So when the review points out that, oh, this is written by an Asian American author, it's like, yeah. I myself don't particularly mind that because it is accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I applaud it, and I think we need it right now to, as you say, challenge the white default. It does feel like it's an awkward phase right now to challenge it. And what I understand it's doing is, besides challenging the default, it's giving gatekeepers markers so that they can search for books if they want to put a book into a particular child's hands that has a character that looks like them. This is an easier way for them to find it, so they don't have to read the whole book and scan through it. I suspect that maybe in a couple years they will move this into tags. They will have a whole tag section below where they can, where they don't have to halt the review, because Kirkus reviews are well written, and they don't have to halt the review to flag, and they can just tag at the bottom that this will cover Asian representation or whatever representation you want, rather than having to slam the brakes on the review to call it out. That might be a graceful transition from this, but I think that's where they're at right now. I applaud those efforts. I do also think that they feel not quite graceful right now.
Response? May?
What Henry said.
Well, and your question made me think about To the Boys I've Never Loved Before. I know, is that the right title? I know some of the words I messed up. But, Jenny Han, the book was fabulous. The Netflix movie was fabulous. Although I do have, she's supposed to be Korean, and then the actors are, you can, there's that. But I also get that you can, well, okay, that's a whole nother conversation to have. But it was, for me, like, even though that story and that movie was not about her ethnic background, she was a character that was biracial, and she's going through this, what we all, universal theme of heartbreak at coming of age, like all that stuff. It was fabulous. And we felt it with her. But I still loved the fact that she was Asian American, and I loved the fact that she was represented, and it just, and I'm okay with it being identified as such, because I think we need it now. I mean, that it would be lovely to have this future in which we don't have to think about those things. But I think we need to have those markers now.
Yeah, but so just, imagining the future, if that book were written if the Kirkus review of that book were written in 2025, it would talk about, this is a coming, I have not read it, I'm not seeing it. So, but this is
what?
That's all right, bad guy.
Yeah, you need to get on Netflix tonight.
So, like, for example, what I'm envisioning is, I say, this is a coming of age story, it's a school story, it deals with, these and these issues, and then, because it does not specifically deal with the Asian American experience, that's not part of the body of the review, but at the bottom it says, Korean, whatever, Asian American female lead, or whatever it is. So that if you're searching for that, you can find it and put that book in a kid's hands. If you want to know what the book is about, what the story is about, you read the review, where it's clearly not about that. It's about more universal experience.
Right.
I think that would be a graceful solution that maybe they'll move towards.
Yeah. Another book that I want to give a shout out to is Eleanor and Park. And again, I feel like that book kind of, have you guys read it? That you couldn't put that down, and it speaks to, and this is to all genders. I will tell you that it speaks to the teenage girl in everybody. It is just that type of book. But again, you have this character, an Asian American, I believe it's Korean, right? male protagonist and a white girl protagonist, and the roles are flipped in terms of model minority. So I just found it was a great book, beautifully written, but again, not so central on the ethnic background. It was kind of important to the character that she was, or he was Asian American, but that wasn't a central part of the story. But then again, reading it as an Asian American, I wish I had that book when I was growing up. You know, like reading it as an Asian American adult, I was thrilled. I was thrilled that, you know, an Asian American was one of the main characters. I have to say, I was thrilled when reading Harry Potter and Cho Chang's name came up. Even though she turned out to be very whiny. Like, that's not exactly, you know, the role that I want.
That's what representation's about. We need whiny characters.
But I love that she was in it. And I love that it was her name, and you could tell that it was going to be an Asian American character. So, any other questions? Are there any comments from our panelists? Anything that you want to say about this topic in general? Henry, I know you got something to say.
No. Used up all my English.
All your words are done. Any other comments from the panelists about this topic in general?
I'm happy to be here.
No.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Hold your applause in the back. The 5,000 people in the back, hold your applause. But I want to talk about that for a second. So when I invited you to be on this panel, what did you think? What were your thoughts?
I really like that movie.
Benson?
I thought it was a great title, and I thought I was surprised that I was selected, to be honest, because I'm fairly new to the industry, and so I'm very grateful to be a part of this and with all you guys here. So, and thank you for coming.
May?
I was really excited to see that you wanted to talk about this in such a big forum, and I thought, wow, this is a step in the right direction. We need to be talking about these kinds of issues. So I was also very grateful.
And to piggyback off that too, I think it's important as well is, you know, we have a dance that we do together, authors and readers, and authors, like our whole community. And, you know, obviously one of the main reasons why, again, I featured this panel and this topic is because I'm Asian American. I hope I'm not like surprising anybody. But this was an important issue to me because of, you know, my identity and my work. But I also wonder, you know, this is kind of what, and I'm very thankful that CSLA has, you know, put me in a position in which I can do these things. But then I think about other conferences, and I think about, you know, other events. And, you know, we need people in those positions to make sure that these type of topics are being heard and out there. So, yeah, we need more of us. And that includes definitely, you know, our audience and our readers and our librarians. I mean, you guys are our biggest source of income. But you're our partners. So if the more that you demand, the more that we can supply. So I think this is a healthy relationship. But the fact that you even came here when you had so many other choices, you know, that means a lot I know it means a lot to me, and I assume it means a lot to us. Okay, so Maple?
To be honest, at first when I got invited, excited and terrified at the same time. Political landmine. Like, what if I said something wrong?
Don't worry, you're just being filmed. It's all right.
It's only forever.
But I do want to say that I haven't been in this industry for too long of a time, maybe about 7 years. And I think I'm tremendously lucky that so many before me has paved such a good road. So by the time when I entered this industry, there are a lot of fantastic, diverse authors and illustrators And I can name so many, like Mike Curado, Isabel Roxas, on and on, of a long list of people who are so diverse. A lot of my KidLit friends, creatives, are of very different ethnicities, and I'm just grateful, and that I'm super grateful that this topic is on, so that we can continue to walk on this road, and perhaps people before us has opened up the doors, and maybe we could continue to hold on to that door, and for other people to just continue to work in this industry so that we could be more diverse and celebrate differences and similarities.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having this panel. It feels like having this panel now because of Crazy Rich Asians, the books and the movie. It feels like we have the opportunity to make history in some ways. I know that sounds overly dramatic, but what is history but the movement of people together? And so it's a historic moment if we decide it's going to be. So thank you for being part of that. 多谢 and 谢谢.
Oh, now he's showing off. If I could get just a comment from, again, the 5,000 people that are in the room, but one of you, can you just share with us, why did you choose this panel over the 5,000 other panels? 5,000 seems to be my number, but over the other panels that you could have chosen. Terry.
Because of my children and my grandchildren, I'm always interested in literature that speaks to their
the population of my school.
Where's your school?
Daly City, right outside of San Francisco. Yeah, yeah.
So I believe, authors, we like to do author visits.
Yes. Anytime.
Available.
Anytime. Come up to the Bay Area.
We'll give you the CSLA deal for speaking fees. So why did you choose to come?
Same student population, bilingual Chinese American International School in San Francisco. Also, my son is mixed race, so yeah, partner too. I think it's important.
Great. Anybody else?
I did it just to come out and support Asian authors, and how are these authors?
So here's my, and as I didn't think about this until you guys were talking, but I love the fact that you came, and it seems like for the random straw poll that we chose, that you came because you were connected to the Asian American community. So how did we get people who are not connected to be interested in this issue? What are some ideas? I'm like legitimately asking. What can we do to make this more of it's already an important issue, I guess, when a mainstream issue?
I mean, I liked his idea about the Asian Harry Potter, Star Wars, like, blockbuster. Like, one of us has got to write that.
Or all of us.
I think kind of like what you said. I think school visits are great because I think it showcases that kids can see that could be me up there. Whenever I do signings at the zoo, and I have this family that keeps coming back to visit me, and they bring their kids and they show me drawings, and because they never really seen an Asian author doing a signing first, and second, I will look at their work and I'll talk with them and what it's like to be an artist, and hopefully inspire them. And now they send me emails of their drawings, and I think it's just the visibility really does help. And I think to be in a school, even if they're not reading the books, they will see you. I think that's very important too. So.
Great. Okay. Oh yes, go ahead.
The one thing that really brought me in was, first of all, the title is catchy, and it's right now.
You're welcome.
But I think the one that really brought me in was the dreaming of diversity, hoping for that time when we look at each other and we see one rather than, everybody's different, and this is part of, our world now.
Well, seeing each other as one while still valuing our differences, right? Right. So to end us on a Game of Thrones reference, I loved in the first season, the King Baratheon, he says, to, King Joffrey. If you guys are watching it, you know that Joffrey turns out to not be so cool, right? But he's such a Joffrey. What's more? Oh, well, sorry. You find out very early. Okay, so anyways, he asked, what's more powerful, 5 or 1, right? And then, of course, everyone's like 5, whatever. And then he does this. I use this move with my students, too, because I think it's cool. So 5 or 1.
Yeah.
Do you remember that scene? And that was amazing. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about. It's like we have, we can all be different, but, somehow unite. And I think that's like one of the things that I hope that we continue to do. And I feel like, as authors, we're in a tight community, and I hope that we do also continue to support each other, to create those stories that you will buy. So on that note, all of our books are being sold by Miss Nelson's right outside Pine Valley. And the authors from all the panel sessions from this, from 3:45 to 4:45, we're going to be outside of this area to sign your books, but we will also be available to sign your books tonight after the CRYM dinner. So we hope to see you guys there. But don't keep the authors too late in terms of signing over here, because we're heading to a happy hour. So you are keeping us between us and our alcohol. Thank you so much for coming.